The 8-year-old girl who survived a horrific accident last week in Limpopo has finally arrived home in Botswana. Botswana President Mokgweetsi Masisi says his government will ensure that the families of victims of the accident get the support they need. 8-year-old Loraine Atlang Siako now faces the prospect of grieving her grandmother's loss as well as processing the trauma of experiencing such an ordeal. To speak to us on how traumatic events affect children psychologically as well as the support they require on healing throughout the journey, we are joined now by forensic profiler Laurie Pieters-James of Cybareti Consulting Services. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. A traumatic event. What are the chances? One survivor, an 8-year-old who now has to face the world. What sort of processes will be required in terms of the healing from such an incredibly traumatic event?
Good evening to you and your viewers. And before we start, I'd just like to express my condolences to the victims in Botswana. Of course, our thoughts and wishes are with them. As far as the child goes, of course, the initial response would be your basic psychological first aid. So that's determining her immediate needs, which would be her degree of shock, loss, insecurity, and so on. You'd also have to spend a lot of time listening to her and allowing her to talk. Also, she will require significant comforting and normalcy in her life because obviously now that she is back in Botswana, things will return to her normal environment. I'm sure it was very stressful for her initially in South Africa. And then allowing her to connect again with her parents. She will have to be offered a very protective environment. And of course, instilling hope in her as well, because obviously she's gone through an immense trauma. So that would be your initial stages of your psychological first aid. Having lived in Botswana myself for 8 years, I understand the community. She does come from a religious community and she was on her way to a religious event. So I'm sure she will receive a lot of support from the church. Of course, the major stressor will be that of post-traumatic stress. Again, this is very individualized because was she conscious? Did she experience the feeling of a threat to her life? She will probably, if she was conscious, re-experience the event, suffering from flashbacks and recurrent thoughts and dreams. She'll have to be supported there by a professional psychologist. She may start with avoidance and numbing behavior and socially distancing from others. Of course, the initial interviews are also really, really important because if you interview too soon, you force the child to relive the event and that reinforces the trauma. So that will have to be handled very, very sensitively. She may also suffer from hyperarousal initially, being very nervous and jittery and having a lot of trouble concentrating. Then there's a whole bunch of additional factors that you'll have to support. So she may have general anxiety, panic, sleep disorders, obviously the initial bereavement and grief from her grandmother, and also the way the parents
which is an important aspect. Pardon me, if you'll allow me to just interject there. Grieving her grandmother. She was traveling with her grandmother. That process in itself will require quite a significant amount of healing. Do children, how do traumatic events affect children? Is there a vast difference between children, how they process the news as opposed to an adult?
Look, there's a general idea that children are a little bit more resilient. It depends again on a number of factors. Gender plays a big part. She is a girl, so they are more susceptible. And also, if she becomes depressed, the comorbidity of depression and PTSD combined are associated with poor recovery. So those issues will need to be assessed and dealt with. These will often show show themselves in health issues or somatic complaints. It's also really important that she maintain a good diet and exercise, which, depending on her family circumstances, are important, financial circumstances. But the government will assist there. Botswana is amazing with the assistance that they provide and the support that they provide. And the University of Botswana is also well placed to assist. They have a very good psychological department there. So I think that she will get the support. The social welfare is very good there. There's some good social workers that can assist. But I think it also depends on additional stresses. You don't want to have cascading stresses, so you need to be very careful of what you expose her to in the beginning, and make sure that you have that professional support all the way through. Yeah. That is critical to her recovery. Yeah. And also, as I said, the way that her parents process the grief, because it's very different if you've got a parent that's processing the grief well, because remember, it's not just her that's affected. Her mother has lost either her mother, I don't know if it's the mother's mother or the father's father, but the parents will also be grieving. So, supporting the family is also critical. But children generally do process and recover from these types of trauma. They're more resilient than adults, but if she continues to show stresses within the 9 to 10 month period after this event, then you should definitely treat more aggressively.
What about, I know in your other field of expertise, looking at, conducting the DNA to identify some of the bodies and ensuring a repatriation process is conducted? What processes will be needed to ensure that the identity check is indeed correct before the repatriation process takes place?
Well, the bodies will probably be moved to a forensic laboratory, and then from there they will probably source DNA from family members in Botswana, or actually from, for example, a hairbrush if it's a female, so that they can match. You need the roots of the hair though, so that they can do a DNA match. Once that victim is positively identified, I do believe that many of the remains are severely charred, which will hamper that process. However, usually you can draw DNA from the socket, the ball socket joint of the hip. No matter how badly charred the body is, that DNA is usually intact because it's preserved in the socket, in the ball joint. So those processes will have to happen, and then the bodies can be repatriated once they're positively identified in South Africa. The laboratory facilities in Botswana are not as well developed and it would be difficult for them to deal with this amount of bodies in the identification process. That the mortuaries there are not very well equipped.
Yeah, with those in Botswana not very well developed or well equipped, we also suffer some challenges on the South African front when it comes to pathology, DNA, and those processes. Maybe not the equipment per se, but the processes that come with it. What timeframes do you think will be needed here, or how much time will it take? And what are some of the challenges that could be faced as this process unfolds?
Look, all the laboratories in South Africa are under huge amounts of strain. There are, in fact, some unidentified bodies still in the mortuaries from 2015 that have not yet been identified. However, given the seriousness of this situation and the fact that it is a foreign affairs situation and a cooperative situation between Botswana, I believe that in the interest of the family, South Africa will try to expedite. However, of course, load shedding and these challenges that we face do not aid in the forensic laboratory situations, as the bodies tend to not remain frozen during long periods of load shedding, and this causes thawing and refreezing. So it would be really important for them to expedite. And yes, we do have problems in all of our laboratories. So it is going to be quite challenging to deal with this amount of remains in an area like Limpopo, which is not as well equipped. I'm quite sure the mortuaries there are under strain and not as well equipped as they would be in, for example, Johannesburg, where we're still under strain, but the processing power is slightly better.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for weighing in on this discussion.